Earlier today, I did a video on St. Louis de Montfort. It's his feast on the church's calendar. But today in the church in Milan in particular, it is also the feast of St. Gianna Beretta Molla. I was privileged to meet her husband, Pietro, to meet her brother, who became a priest, her sister, Virginia, who became a nun, to meet all her children, including the child for whom she gave her life. Who was St. Gianna Beretta Molla? Well, she was born in Magenta, which is just outside Milan, in October 4th, 1922. She was one of 13 children. She made her first Holy Communion at the tender age of 5, which was a testimony to her faith. But she grew up in a devout family. She was not the best of students. She, at one point, failed Latin and Italian. She was not in the best of health. Her parents had kept her home from school for an entire year to recover her health. But eventually, she decided to study medicine and became a doctor. She graduated in 1949 from the University of Pavia and then subspecialized in pediatrics in Milan in 1952. Then she opened a small clinic in the small town of Messero, and I've been privileged to visit her doctor's office there. Her younger sister had also studied medicine and entered religious life and became a missionary. Gianna thought of missionary work herself, and she longed to go where her brother, who was a priest, actually two of her brothers became priests. One became a Franciscan, and the other became a diocesan. But her brother was a missionary in Brazil, and she longed to go to Brazil. But because of her poor health, she did not. Rather, she stayed in Italy, and she pursued her medical career and had thoughts of raising a Christian family. But before marrying her husband, Pietro, I wanted to mention her medical practice because, unlike many doctors today who often view medicine as a profession, she viewed the practice of medicine as a part of her Christian vocation in the world. She wrote, "We have occasions in which the priest is not there. Our mission is not over when the medicines are no longer of use. We still have to lead the soul to God. Just as the priest may touch Jesus, so we doctors also touch Jesus in the body of our patients, the poor, the young, the old, children. There Jesus is made present in our midst." Think about that in the midst of this crisis, that for many physicians and healthcare providers, medicine is not a profession. It's not just about business. It's a vocation, a calling. And so, again, I express my gratitude to those who are leading us through this crisis. Gianna was a very spiritual person, but beyond medicine, she thought about her vocation and possibly the call to marriage. She waited patiently to hear God's call. And finally, she embraced with enthusiasm the call to form a truly Christian family. She became engaged to an engineer, Pietro Molla, and she married him in the Basilica of San Martino in Magenta. I was privileged to visit there as well. In a letter dated September 13th, 1955, she wrote to Pietro. She wrote, "Thus, with the help and blessing of God, we will do everything so that our new family may be a little cenacle, where Jesus rules over all our affections, desires, and actions. My Pietro, the wedding is only a few days away, and I feel so moved to receive the sacrament of love. We will become collaborators of God in creation. We can give him children who love and serve him." How different it is from modern couples who are so concerned about the wedding ceremony that they forget about the marriage itself. Gianna and Pietro were truly blessed. They had 3 children between November 1956 and July 1959, Pierluigi, Mariolina, and Laura. Gianna was a remarkable modern woman. She loved her children intensely. She knew how to harmonize with simplicity and balance her duties as mother, wife, and doctor. How our modern women today have to balance all of these things, and she's a great patron for them because she really did balance them. She maintained her medical practice at Messero and Magenta, and she actually visited Cincinnati from May 26th through May 29th, 1959. There's even a postcard in the archives there where she grew up and where she's buried, indicate that she sent to her sister from Cincinnati. Her husband, Pietro, worked for, we say Formica, they say Formica, but he worked for Formica as an engineer, and so he came here. In September 1961, she was nearing this end of the 2nd month of her 4th pregnancy, and she decided that after her 4th child, she would give up medicine. The pregnancy was a difficult one, and it was discovered that Gianna had a fibrous uterine tumor, something easily cured today. The standard procedure would have been to remove the uterus, which would have resulted in the death of her child. But Gianna told the surgeon to remove the tumor only so that her child might live. She knew the risk to her own life that the continued pregnancy would begin, but she wanted her child to live. The operation was successful, and she carried the child to term, Gianna Manuela, who I had the privilege again of meeting. But shortly before the child's birth, she told her husband, "If you must decide between me and the baby, without hesitation, choose. I demand it. Choose the baby. Save him." On Holy Saturday of April 21st, 1962, she gave birth by cesarean section to a baby girl, Gianna Manuela, and shortly thereafter she developed a high fever, which was caused by septic peritonitis. And on Easter morning, she held her newborn daughter for the last time. Her suffering only increased as she entered into her agony. And on Wednesday of that week, she spoke with her husband for the last time. "Pietro, I was already over there. Do you know what I saw? Someday I will tell you. But because we were so happy, we were too comfortable with our marvelous children, full of health and grace, with all the blessings of heaven, they sent me down here to suffer still, because it was not right to come to the Lord without enough suffering." This was her last conversation with her husband, and she passed from death to life on this day in 1962, at the age of 39. Her remarkable sacrifice and renown spread quickly, and the process for her beatification began in 1970. Her formal cause for canonization was opened in 1980. She was beatified in 1994 and canonized in 2004 by Pope John Paul II. It had been nearly 400 years for the Church of Milan since one of their own had been canonized as a saint, which makes us ask, are there saints today? The Second Vatican Council called us all to holiness. St. Gianna Beretta Molla would answer the question with a commanding yes. But what was so special about her? I would say this: it was not simply a question of her giving her life for her own child. Many mothers have done this throughout history. Rather, it was that Gianna was a model of holiness, of marriage, and of motherhood. If you look at her wedding pictures, her husband Pietro is looking around at his friends, he's smiling. But her eyes are turned toward heaven. If you think about her marriage preparation, she and Pietro, they did a novena with the reception of Holy Communion at separate churches just prior to their marriage. They understood their vocation to holiness. And the idea of a vocation is at the heart of Gianna's life. Who is God calling me to be? What is he asking of me? From youth to marriage, to motherhood, she always asks these questions. Gianna Molla was the first married laywoman to be canonized. She is the first female physician also to be canonized, the first working mother. The question of vocation was not a selfish question. Rather, it is a question for all of us. How do we love? How may I love the Lord? How may I love my neighbor? There is no greater love than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friends. In St. Gianna, we see the scriptural passage, made flesh. It is a marvelous thing to meet her husband, Pietro, before he died, to meet her children, to meet her brothers and sisters. It really was to see the inheritance, the legacy of holiness. But now I want to read for you a translation I did again, from the Office of Readings for her feast day. One thing is certain. We have been objects of predilection from all eternity. All things have a particular end. All things obey a law. The stars follow their orbit. The seasons continue to follow one another in a perfect way. All things develop for a pre-established end. All animals follow a natural instinct. Also to each one of us, God has marked out the way, the vocation, beyond the physical life, the life of grace. There will come a day when we recognize that around us there are other creatures, and while we realize that this is outside of ourselves, within us a new creature grows. It is a sacred and tragic moment from infancy to youth. There we place the question of our becoming, what we will become. One does not have to resolve this by age 15, but is better to orient our entire life toward the way in which the Lord calls us. Our earthly and eternal happiness depends on following our vocation well. What is our vocation? It is a gift of God. Therefore, it comes from God. If it is a gift of God, then our preoccupation must be that of knowing the will of God. We must enter onto that street, if God wills. We must never force the door open. We must enter when God wants and as God wants. How are we to know our vocation? By asking heaven with prayer. By asking our spiritual director. By asking ourselves, knowing our inclinations. Every vocation is a vocation to material, spiritual, and moral maternity, because God has placed in us the instinct toward life. The priest is father, the sisters are mothers, spiritual mothers. Woe to those children who do not accept the vocation to maternity. To prepare one's self for one's vocation means to prepare oneself to be a giver of life. There are many difficulties, but with the help of God, we must walk always without fear, so that if in the battle for our vocation we must die, that would be the most beautiful day of our life. To all mothers, to all those who pursue holiness, I thank you for the gift of yourself. God bless you all.